Hello and welcome to my driver rankings video for the British Grand Prix, the race that was actually filled with a lot of action. And of course we could talk all day about that first lap incident and the collision between Max Verstappen and also Lewis Hamilton. I'll get onto it into a little bit later on in the video. But this is the series in which you guys, the audience, can get involved by following that link in the top line of the description. You can submit your driver ranks for this weekend's Grand Prix. 20 is the absolute best score that they could have achieved for this entire weekend, and 1 is the worst score that they could have achieved. I'll then average out all of the audience ranks and then compare them to my own ranks that we will go over in just a little moment's time, and then also to my big data algorithm which decides the driver of the weekend based on all sorts of numerous categories and data. But with all of that out of the way, let us jump on into the driver rankings video for the British Grand Prix. And we'll just quickly take a look at the championships. And this is the drivers' standings. There are just 8 points in it at the top between Verstappen and Hamilton. A 33-point gap has come down to 8. Lando Norris is now 3rd, with Bottas now 4th as he moves past Sergio Perez, who did not score any points. With the 2 Ferraris in 6th and 7th, with the Constructors' Championship also considerably closer. There is now just 4 points in it, with Red Bull only scoring 3 points this weekend, courtesy of Max Verstappen's sprint race victory. But now from the World Championships, we're going to take a look at the Audience Prediction Championships, the series in which you guys make your predictions about what could happen in the weekend, along with myself as well. So on screen is the full leaderboard for the contestants that entered into the British Grand Prix, and it is Aaron from the 5 Red Lights channel that has dominated this weekend, 19 out of 25. From Carrie Slaughter as well, and then Arturo Salazar and Leroy joint on 17. We then have a bunch of people joint on 10, Chewbacca, Juali, F1 Kerala, Joshua, Tom Sayer as well, with the second half of the leaderboard looking like this, where I am joint last on 8, with Object Maniac Lewis and Ricardo Coota also on 8. Not an ideal set of predictions that I made on Thursday. Now, if you guys want to get involved in the Audience Prediction Championships, make sure to look out for the video that I release on the Thursday leading up to each of the Grand Prix weekends. But now what we'll do is we'll quickly just add up all of the season scores so far to see who has been the best predictor throughout this season. And it is still Evan Darcy, but only 10 points now. They didn't have a great set of predictions this weekend. Just 10 points to Joe Bischoff now, who has pulled away from everybody else, as well as a Doctor Who channel who's pulled away from me. I am now joint on 122 with Arturo Salazar. We now have a bunch of other people joining the 100 Points Club. We have Aaron from the 5 Red Lights channel, Min Verstappen, we have Alan Piera as well, Elliot, Gemma Gibson, Tom Sayer and Rituraj all joining the 100 Point Club. With the second leaderboard looking a little bit like this, we've got people like Archie, Elian, Object Maniac Lewis, Kevin, Callum, Tushar Sign, Harry Scott, and then finally, second to last, we have this table here. We have people like Chewbacca, Hugo, Frederick Alex Santiago, Andrew Lee, and then finally we have the bottom half of the leaderboard. Now, not to worry if you've not entered into every single one of these rounds, as you would then appear a little bit low down in these leaderboards, as I've worked out an average points for the entries that you have made, and that has put Schlank and Evan Darcy at the top, 16 and 14.5 respectively. So if you see yourself high up in this leaderboard, where I'm currently sat on 12.2 for the average points scored for the rounds that I have entered, then you know you are a good predictor, as Leroy is well above myself, along with Joe Bischoff, Marco Daly. All of these people are well above me. Then we have the second leaderboard out of 4 down here, where there are a bunch of people super close together. We have Elliot on 11.4, then Gemma Gibson and Hal joint on 11.3. Loads of people joined on 10, Amelia Swan, Channel Infinity, etc. With the penultimate table looking a little bit like this, people into the single digits. And then finally, table number 4 looks a little bit like this. And with those Audience Prediction Championships all done and dusted, we'll now take a look at my driver rankings for the British Grand Prix. 20 being the best score that they could possibly achieve, and 1 being the worst score that they could possibly achieve. We are going in 2020 Constructors' Championship order, so we start with the 2 Mercedes, and we will end with the 2 Williams drivers. And we start with Lewis Hamilton, the race victor, 18 out of 20. Now, his incident with Max Verstappen. Penalty fully fully justified. And personally, I think his celebrations after the Grand Prix, whilst Max Verstappen is currently in hospital, obviously he didn't know that at the time, felt a little bit disrespectful post-race, in my personal opinion. Penalty completely justified, as ultimately he did have bounds of room, about half a car's width on the inside of Copse Corner coming in. But equally, Max Verstappen has been extremely aggressive and sharp elbows, shall we say, whenever they've come to battle each other this season. Picture Imola, for example, where they just elbows out, both of them, and it was Hamilton who came off worse, obviously not as worse as Max Verstappen in this race. But yes, I do personally feel it was a completely justified penalty, and Hamilton easily at fault. All these people claiming it to be a racing incident, no, it just wasn't a racing incident whatsoever. But definitely to see Max Verstappen climb out of that car after a 51G impact and to have a small little concussion as well, which is why he was a bit woozy-doozy after getting out of the car, and after having the precautionary checks, having to go back into hospital as well. Pretty hefty crash. Pretty hefty crash. But ultimately, 18 out of 20 for Lewis Hamilton is an extremely respectable score, perhaps a touch high due to that incident with Max Verstappen. His overtake on Charles Leclerc, his overtake on Lando Norris at the same corner that he executed perfectly, he just coincidentally didn't execute it perfectly against Max Verstappen. Anyway, conspiracy theories out of the way, that is Lewis Hamilton's score for this weekend. We'll now move on in to Valtteri Bottas. 16 out of 20. An exceptional race for Valtteri Bottas. Agreed, he didn't quite have the pace, especially compared to Lewis Hamilton in that last couple of laps, the last 20 or so laps, where they did the team order invert of the positions. He just didn't seem to have the pace, but he was definitely solid and easily the third or the fourth fastest car on this track. And we'll now take a look at Max Verstappen. 11. That's mainly because I don't know what would have happened in the Grand Prix. So I don't want to give him anything higher, like a 15 or a 16 or a 17. And I feel like giving him anything too low is harsh. But anything too high is too nice. So 11. Ultimately, what we could do is just look at the sprint race, and we saw how dominant he was in the sprint race. And I feel that would have easily transferred into this Grand Prix, regardless of what Lewis Hamilton would have done, as I don't personally think Hamilton could have got past on that opening lap. If he did, like cleanly, then it would have made for a more interesting Grand Prix, whereas if Verstappen had stayed in front, I think he would have stayed in front for the duration of this Grand Prix by about 2 or 3 seconds. So 11 out of 20 is Max Verstappen's score. However, Sergio Perez, 5. Now, sprint qualifying wasn't his... Was it his fault? He did lose it on his own. Yeah, sprint qualifying was his fault. He then retired, started from the pit lane, got up to P9, P8, and then fell out with the points again. I don't really know what happened in the second half of the race. Yeah, took the fastest lap point away from Lewis Hamilton. Didn't score it himself as he was well outside of the top 10 at the time, but it's just one less point that Mercedes and Hamilton scored together. A weird weekend for Sergio Perez. However, Daniel Ricciardo, 15 out of 20. A very good weekend. A very decent qualifying as well in the sprint race. And then just to bring it home in P5, which I believe is his best McLaren finishing result as well. Very solid. Lando Norris, however, just 1 point up. 16 out of 20. That was a very good Grand Prix, and he was running consistently in a podium position for a little while until Valtteri Bottas and then Lewis Hamilton came past after Hamilton's 10-second time penalty. So yes, a weekend for Norris to be absolutely proud of. P4 at his home Grand Prix. Mega stuff. Then we'll take a look at Sebastian Vettel. 8 out of 20. Back to spinning on his own after the safety car restart. Into Brooklands, on the exit of Brooklands, going onto the old international start straight. Yeah, he just lost it on his own. And then I think, was there engine issues or something that caused his retirement later on in the race? I'm not 100% sure, but he retired on lap 40. So 8, I think. A little bit justified. However, Lance Stroll actually got some points for Aston Martin. 12 out of 20. A very good race for Lance Stroll. I enjoyed watching that from him. Qualifying, I can't quite remember where he was in qualifying, but I don't think it was as good as Sebastian Vettel. So yeah, 12 out of 20 is decent. 13, I think, is a little bit of a push. But Fernando Alonso, 15 out of 20. That man really, really knows how to drive to the limits of a crap car. Picture the Minardi, for example. Picture some of the Renaults that he had. Picture the, 2012 Ferrari. He knows how to extract everything from a crap car, and that is exactly what he did this entire weekend. That first lap of the sprint race where he went from, P15 or P14 or something? Or no, sorry, P11 to P5. Ridiculous stuff. Then in the Grand Prix to just hold that and consistently score decent points in P7, mega. But from Fernando Alonso's 15 out of 20, we move to Ocon's 12 out of 20. Again, a bit of an interesting weekend for Esteban Ocon. A better qualifying, a sort of sprint race, and then a decent race. He scored some points. Which after his 2 absolutely abysmal Austrian Grand Prix, yeah, this is a much, much better weekend. Not ideal, but better. Then we move to the P2 man, Charles Leclerc, 18 out of 20, and in my opinion, the deserved Grand Prix victor of this weekend. He led pretty much every single lap of this Grand Prix and was just overtaken by a storming Lewis Hamilton at the end of the race. There really wasn't anything extra he could have done in this weekend, so 18 out of 20 is his score. Then his teammate Carlos Sainz, 15 out of 20. Again, just an exceptional comeback race after being dinked off in the sprint race by George Russell, who then received a 3-place grid drop. Personally, Sainz should have received a penalty for rejoining relatively dangerously in front of one of the Alfa Romeos. But, he didn't, wasn't even investigated for it, but a good comeback, and 15 out of 20 is his score. Then we move on into the AlphaTauris, and it is Pierre Gasly up first, 10 out of 20. A difficult weekend for the AlphaTauris, especially for Gasly, actually. He was, P12 or something like that in the sprint race, and then went forward just 1 position. It was a strange weekend for Pierre, who seemed to have a very good season, and come the British Grand Prix, didn't have a good race. It happens. So 10 out of 20 is his score. However, his teammate Yuki Tsunoda bagged himself a point while starting P16, I think it was, or something like that, much further back than Pierre Gasly. So 12 out of 20 is Yuki Tsunoda's score. That was a little bit of a tongue twister right there. Then we will move on in to the Alfa Romeos, and Kimi Räikkönen gets an 11. Again, the sprint race was exceptional. His opening laps are just really, really, really good. And he was on the fringes of the points. He was P12, P11, fighting with Sergio Perez, who just wasn't anywhere in this Grand Prix. And then there was a small little bit of collisions. Whether it was Perez's fault cutting in front of Räikkönen, Räikkönen was behind, whether it was Räikkönen's fault, who knows. Ultimately, neither driver was penalised off the top of my head, I don't think. But yes, Räikkönen ended up spinning out, and then he finished a couple places lower rather than just outside of the points. Then we'll move to Giovinazzi, 9 out of 20. His race pace sucks. His race pace sucks. That's all I'll have to say about that. His qualifying is really, really good. Giovinazzi and Räikkönen are just an inverse of each other, I find. Räikkönen really struggles to qualify. He's been out in Q1 for consecutive races this season so far. And then his race is really good, and he was consistently running ahead of Giovinazzi up until the collision with Sergio Perez. And then Giovinazzi qualifies really well, and then moves backwards in the race. They are literally just the reverse of each other. If they just had a combination of the two, I was about to say had a baby and then there was no. Yes, if there was just a combination of the two of them together, it would be perfect. You'd have a really good qualifier and a really good racer. But at the minute, they've got one good qualifier who's not a good racer, and one good racer who's not a good qualifier. Also, apologies if you do hear any engine noises outside. I do have to keep my window open, as it is boiling hot today. It's like 29, 30 degrees, and it's 8:15. I think it's about 24 or something like that at the moment. It's just horribly hot. But we will now move on into the Haas cars, and Mick Schumacher gets a 4. He was behind Mazepin, and Mazepin was a minute behind Latifi, or whoever was the next non-Haas car, who I think was actually Perez in the end, who took his pit stop. Yeah, Haas car very slow, which we know, and then Mick Schumacher slower than Mazepin. I don't know of any incidents that happened, whether there was a contact, who knows, whether there was an issue engine-wise or mechanical for Schumacher, I don't know. So 4 out of 20 is his score, and then by virtue of actually being quicker than his teammate, Mazepin gets a 5. But again, a minute off the pace of the next non-Haas car, not ideal. Then finally, we'll take a look at the Williams, and it is George Russell who gets a 14 out of 20. The one time he finishes in the top 10, which is in the sprint race, there are no points awarded for the top 10. And I think he ended up coming home in P14, but just an overall, a very, very solid weekend for George Russell. And Nicholas Latifi actually had another decent weekend as well. Finally, some decent race pace shown by Nicholas Latifi. He gets an 11 out of 20. And there we go, there are my driver rankings all done and dusted for this weekend's British Grand Prix. Please let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this race and your opinions on that Verstappen and Hamilton incident, as I'm sure everybody has a bunch of opinions. Then also feel free to completely disagree or agree with my rankings that were just shown in this video. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.